It's hard to define the Grail. It's a search. It refers to the sacred cup that the seeker would travel a long journey to find and would only encounter at the point at which a certain amount of purification had occurred. And if they were lucky, they might have a glimpse of the Grail.
The idea that life is a chalice, a cup, which is filled and emptied and filled again and shared.
But what was most interesting perhaps about the myth is that in the course of the looking, it was in the seeking that the transformation would occur.
It's also a very general human, almost cosmic symbol. The cup, the cauldron, and the womb. The womb is also, in a way, a cup, isn't it?
It's a desire to find a spiritual answer to the questions of life, an answer that is connected to justice.
And in some senses, the final encounter with the Grail was the result of the previous transformation. That you had to already transform yourselves in order to even be able to recognize it and to recognize what it would take to find it. So the seeking becomes, in a sense, more important than the actual arrival in the myth.
The search is really about the inner Grail, about that holy place in us that seeks to be filled with spirit. So fabulous.
Interestingly enough, this women's movement was really founded by a Jesuit priest, Father Jacques von Ginneken, whose picture you see, first thing you see when you come into the dining room. Very brilliant man, and he had this vision that lay women had no place to go except marriage and the convent. And so he wanted to found a movement that would give lay women in the world a chance to make an impact on the world.
I've heard this story several times, in several different ways, so I don't know how literally true it is. But the story, as I like to hear
November 1st, 1921, Father Van Ginneken gathered a small group of young women, and he had a couple of very big ideas. One idea was what he called the elbow of time. You know, when you bend your arm, there's a lot of activity in the elbow, and he thought that time was ripe, that change could happen.
His vision was that the world was out of balance. We're talking about the 1920s now. The world was out of balance. And in his writings, he's talked about there has to be an end to Bolshevism and capitalism, an end to patriarchy.
And the second thing he thought was that women had wonderful gifts and talents that the world and the church had not yet recognized.
What I heard was that he was meditating one Good Friday and became bummed out at the failure of Christianity to change the world, make that much of a difference. And somehow, having been raised in a very female-led household and professionally as an intellectual, being aware of the role of women and the role of goddesses in other cultures, came to the conclusion that some of the inspiration had been lost from Christianity because men didn't understand it.
And the third thing he thought was that women who stood together, united in solidarity, could turn the world around.
The matriarchy needs to rise, and in order for the world to come into balance again, and it would be this beautiful new synthesis of matriarchy and patriarchy. And that for this to be accomplished, women needed to be brought into the public sphere. That women needed to have power in the public realm.
So that first group, he sat them down and he put a globe in the middle and said, pick your continent. And there were some lucky things that happened, like when Ludwig van Kersbergen and Joan Overbos were planning to come to the United States in 1940, they had a team of 5 people picked out. And Margaret van Gilse, who was the international president, was nervous, and she said to them, "You get on the boat and go. Don't wait for these other 3." And they got on the last boat to leave Holland before Hitler invaded. So they made it here by an eyelash in April of 1940. And listening to Joy, the great ideas are still alive and well and attracting women of the next generation.
Well, the Grail started in the Netherlands, so the United States was just one part of the Grail. I mean, it's not like the United States is the central and the other places are radiation. We are part of the radiation, right? And from the very beginning, we always knew that it was an international movement.
When Joan and Ludwig came to the United States to found the Grail, they didn't have the slightest thought of starting with a training program on a farm. The Grail had never worked on farms before. And it was a combination of chance, of taking advantage of an opportunity, and of paying attention to what was going on in the first few years that they came here. There was the liturgical movement, there was the interracial movement, there was the rural life movement, there were the utopian communities. They were things that were already alive and going, the Catholic worker movement. And I think when Ludwig and Joan, in my imagination, saw this farm that was available, that they could purchase, they began to see that they could connect and strengthen and be strengthened by other existing movements in the United States at the time.
They started up what they called your school of formation, and women would come 60 to 100 at a time, living a completely holistic life, working the farm, singing the chant, making art, studying the great scholars of the time, tremendous liturgical innovation, while they lived the monastic hours and followed the liturgical year. And it was a marvelous experiment in countercultural living.
The overview that I had, with whatever the hard things were, or the dumb things that people did, or the stupid rules that we had, they paled so by comparison with the glory. I felt I was living like the Cathedral of Chartres or something like that, or the rhythm of life, the day pierced by the hours of the chant and the divine office and the rhythm of work, and then taking time for meditation and reading these great books together and hearing them read, and then our Sunday morning glorious breakfasts, and the sense that you had of being part of a church that was universal and then being part of a Grail that was global. And even if you weren't someplace else, if you did your little thing in the kitchen or your little thing at Grailville, you were part of this great movement. It was wonderful.
And they were very consciously and absolutely committed to being what's called a lay movement, which means they would not be formally incorporated into the church as, let's say, as a third order or as a religious congregation. They would be ordinary women living ordinary lives that have been trained in the profundities of the mystical religious experience in such a way that they would be extraordinary in their ordinary lives. Yeah.
At the time of the year's school and the beginnings at Grailville, the culture of the Catholic Church was very, very private. Spirituality and sexuality were very, very private. And at the Grail, there was this amazing celebration in liturgy and in the arts, but those areas were very private. When the 60s and the 70s came, when things opened up and people were suddenly able to speak, there was a disruption to the kind of communal life that had been lived. And people left, people went their own way, and it was what was happening in religious orders, in the whole church, the whole Catholic Church, and not just the Catholic Church, in many, many churches. It was an opening, and some of it was exciting, some of it was very frightening, some of it was disabling. It was very troubling to people.
One of the differences that Vatican II made was the emphasis on God's action in the world. You know, the church as leaven in the world. And so I say here, acting on the new insights into the oneness of God's action in church and world, in the late 1960s, individual Grail members began to move into work in non-Grail structures. And so people moved into community organizing in the inner city. They were Grail members and they saw their Grail work as doing this social justice work in the world.
And then the 70s, really the 60s and 70s, the Grail opened up to women of other faiths, to a different governing system that had these little leadership teams responsible for specific things, but no overall president. So it was a combination of a feminist structure and an openness to different kinds of women, and even the Catholic Church became a much more open institution.
Part of the task of the Grail is to look at the times and a sense that the spirit is moving in history, and that we need to look at each period and to see what's called for and what's needed.
We're not put here on earth to let things happen to us. We can make a difference. One or two of us can make a difference, and a whole community of us can make a great difference. And I think that the Grail is still about that, making a difference, making a change, changing things that look impossible to be changed, but changing them. I think one good example is when we went to San Jose. We built this Grail Center in a little house, and some years later we have a low-cost housing development built by the Grail on Grail land to answer the needs of the people in the community. And it's housing for sale, not rental housing, because that's what they wanted. They wanted to own their own homes.
And we came to the meeting where, okay, this is one where we have to figure out what our priority is, or what our priorities are.
And some of the people, the community felt housing was one, child care center was another one, and the resource center.
And of course, as usual, they're all wonderful and can't be missed, so we did them all.
It's built 34 units for families, and the San Jose Grail has 1 unit. But we have a resource center now, and a child development center.
And up in Cornwall, New York, we've got another kind of center with another demographic that works with the people of New York City and develops and has very high-powered women involved in politics who are looking to expand their spiritual selves in the midst of these horrendous burnout political lives that they live.
We have a United Nations group of women, many who are U.S. members, but others from other countries who, when they come for meetings, also relate to our U.S. members, and are considered a non-governmental organization with a voice at the United Nations, and regularly lobby with other groups to advance agendas, whether for women's rights, equal rights, issues like the trafficking of women and children, the globalization of the economy, fair trade, health issues.
I'm one of the holders of a Grail United Nations Pass. I'm part of the UN team, and that enables me to do a lot of the UN advocacy work that I do. How do we work in an arena that honors a multilateral, democratic decision-making process that is still an ideal, but to some extent the U.S. had bought into, in a moment when we now have a unilateralism that is really out to destroy the multilateral system. And the real power is lying in these huge economic institutions like the WTO and the IMF and the World Bank and private corporations, etc.
This is mainly a group of women leaders who are formed a support group for each other and who feel the need for a spiritual context.
And then people are involved in different things in our groups. One woman's very involved, and she gets us to give her some support sometimes in defending Cuba. Another person's involved in things around international women's justice issues.
What we try to do is to use what we know and what people know about their own economic realities as the basis for coming to a bigger analysis around economic issues, both at the local and at the national and at the global level.
I'm involved in city unionism.
A number of progressive faculty organized a number of years ago to take over the union because of the attacks on public higher education and to try to defend probably one of the most broad-based universities for immigrants, minorities, and working students.
There was a developer who wanted to build a huge development known as Riverwalk along the East River, but a citizens group fought it, and like David and Goliath, we were able to get that project off the planning boards. Now, besides environmental education about the East River ecology and the botany in the park and energy conservation, we also see this. We're not just building a park, we're building community.
But none of us can keep doing this kind of work, particularly in very, bleak times in terms of the political panorama, without having a community and a sense of spirit that nurtures us and replenishes us. And I think that, we need to go to the well within us, but I also go to the Grail well to be filled up again.
I was especially impressed by my experiences as my first experience in Cornwall, where the minute you walked in the door, it was like there were these fairy godmothers who were there, who welcomed you, and you had the impression that even though they had never laid eyes on you, that they automatically saw all of the value you had as a human being and recognized it, and even if you didn't exactly recognize it yourself, they knew that great things were going to happen with you, and you were just free to unfold as those things came out of you.
You make hospitality one of your prime values, and so you are open to visitors, you're open to programs, and you're open to welcoming in a way that helps people to understand community in its more deep way than just social.
So Cornwall provides a retreat center for these very high-powered women who are involved out there in the world every day trying to change it as a place for them to retreat and to nurture themselves.
Every 4 to 5 years we've had an international training program here, and then we've had the Women of the Americas program, and a lot of social justice programs, and of course spirituality.
In 1992 in Mexico City, we had a Women of the Americas conference. We had women from all over the Americas, about 120 women. And we started to just look at some trends that were going on in our countries, like the abandonment of the countryside, the abandonment of the rural sector, and the overflooding into the cities. Things that you'd never seen before in traditional societies, like the abandonment of children and old people, which was starting to be seen in Latin America, and talking about export and import agriculture. Just trends, that get played out in different ways in different communities.
And people in the wealthier countries are trying to figure out what is their responsibility with regard to that poverty, and what is there a response? Is there something that Grail can do?
Our program, Overcoming Poverty, is based on the same methodology, training for transformation. And then we are training women who are leaders in their countries.
At this point, the greatest endeavor of common work has been around the training for community transformation. We've been running it as a pilot project for the last few years and are on the brink of taking another major leap with it. Rather than a generic community organizing training, it'll be community organizing training, but within the context of spiritual diversity or within the context of environmental sustainability.
Say in the middle of, in Manhattan and Midtown, those get the huge clusters of money. And then as you go to Queens, Brooklyn, and when you get to South Bronx, it's like a little.
We have a Grail Center in the South Bronx that is utterly linked to that community and to that church and parish and completely and totally involved in it at the social justice level and training of those young Hispanic girls to come into self-empowerment and self-esteem and all of that. And that's in response to being in the South Bronx.
We're trying actually to get the youth, the girl youth to be more empowered as women, because some of them are so afraid to really speak their mind, or they're afraid of doing anything. They feel that they don't have enough education or they just can't do it, period.
So you think we could get some girls together that would be interested?
I think so.
Yeah. But how many do you think we could get together? What would be a good size, do you think, to work for?
I think we should start small.
Yeah.
And then we could see how we can expand it. And it also depends also on the ages, because you don't.
Oh yeah, what ages?
Like,
what ages?
What ages? I think somewhere between 14 and 17.
14 and 17? That's good.
Yeah. Because too young?
Yeah.
Like,
Oh yeah, no.
And too old would be bad as
right.
well.
That's why the girls group I'm separating into two groups, because the younger ones, and it can just be years difference, and it's a huge difference. And should we meet here at the Grail, or should we meet at St. Louis?
When we start, I think it would be nice to meet here because it's like small and it's like it'll feel like home and stuff. And then if it gets really, really big, then we can meet at St. Louis.
Over there.
Yeah.
And at least the core team could meet here anyways.
We helped the community. We went to a place where they had an incinerator. We walked over there and we said that we want flower plants, not power plants. And we recycle stuff too.
What do you recycle?
Bottles, paper, plastic.
The Grail was part of my growing process. I grew up here in the South Bronx, and through the Grail I met women who were in charge, women who were active politically, socially. So I saw that growing up, and that's what I aimed for my life. So I don't think it changed my life, but created my whole persona and personality and person.
People are always bringing bags of clothes. So when we had food pantry, we'd put them out on the table, and that's the thing that would bring people running. So we thought, look at the enthusiasm around the clothes. Now here's something you could bring people together with. And we decided that we would sell the clothes and base it here at the Grail House, because we wanted to develop this as the Grail Center and engage people more and more in the house. So that was the beginning of this project called Clothes for Community, because it's clothes that's developing community and using something that really attracts the women. And then Panda Kalala, who also took training for community transformation, got really a sense of doing the process with the people. So with these women that work at the food pantry and that work with Clothes for Community, she's been doing workshops.
Most of the time we want to tell people what they have to do. But through the transformation I learned that we have to know what the people need for us to help them. Because if I know the need if I know your need, then I'll be able to provide if I have the possibility. But if I don't know what you need, I just say, okay, take this, but that's not exactly what you want. It's not going to help you.
For the Grail, Grailville is the home of the National Grail. It is a symbolic heart of the movement. We're on the farm, we're out in the country, so the work that we do is absolutely determined by our location, whether it's in terms of working the land and then and then becoming an environmental education, an ecological experiment, which we're about now with the Wetlands Project, that we're doing, and new ways of wastewater treatment, and permaculture and sustainability, organic farm, setting up nature conservancies throughout the property, and now looking at potential eco-villages or other ways of having housing at Grailville.
Grailville is an eco-village. Not only do we have the history of this lived farming community, but we have a spiritual base. So often people think of, to be sustainable, you have to start new with new wood, new blah, 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 blah. But the reality is renovating spaces is also a very sustainable approach. And Grailville has consistently done that, in transforming the pigsty into an art studio, or into a meeting space, or the oratory was a barn. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous, prayerful place.
The arts were integrated in the whole life of Grailville, and there was a specific department for the arts at Grailville, and several women were working specifically for producing art and for selling art.
And I was very free in a sense to make whatever I was inspired to make. But then the decision to put it into production had to be a bigger group.
And it's not just the visual arts. I mean, it's also, poetry and playwrights and music. Just all the different. The Grail seems to attract very creative people with poetry in their heart.
And one of the ways we express ourselves as a community is through our art and our music and our poetry. We have a wonderful poet. And through our celebrations, through our rituals.
Warriors who have lived and gone before us, be with us now.
Fran is a member of the Grail Women Task Force, and I am too. And she came to one of our meetings, and it was about a month after she'd had this 8th annual Women's Day of Prayer in Columbus, and she told us about it.
I see that as Grail work. Bringing together an ecumenical group of women of all races, ethnicities, all faiths, no faiths. Just a solid belief in the presence of God in their lives and in the life of this world. Coming together and using prayer, in the terms that I use it, as a political tool for change.
I think the Grail is exploring processes that can be used in other settings. You'll notice that I myself last year got my feet wet on a citywide Women's Day of Prayer here in Cincinnati. Now that is very Grail in its intention, which was to bring women of different faiths together to imagine the city as a healed place.
One way of thinking about the Grail is that it's a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle and a culture.
That's Sharon Thompson's favorite word, the culture of the Grail. And she uses it to say that this culture emphasizes the arts. It espouses spirituality, but defines spirituality in a large context. It includes social justice, love of the earth, celebration, hard work, and the value of simple living.
But the culture of the Grail is one, I would say, that tries to be integrating your stance in the world, your own personal self, and your relation to others and to community.
I think the next great work for the Grail is something we've been doing for so many years and we didn't even realize that it was our work. It was just what we were doing. How you have a group of diverse women, diverse in their spirituality, diverse in terms of their generation and the culture that they were trained and their psyches were formed in, diverse in the sense of their ethnicity, their color, their class, the culture that they've grown into and come from. Diverse in the sense of their sexual orientations or their sexual lifestyles and spirituality and the different paths that we follow, the ways in which we follow the holy. to contain all of that diversity, each piece of the mosaic has to have its own fullness. It's not about individuals and diversity being absorbed into a dominant culture.
In other countries, racism is big. But here, it's very, very big. And so I'm constantly looking at my own thoughts and feelings about people who are ethnically or culturally or racially different from me. It's just how it is. But I think the more we're honest with ourselves about it, and willing to say, I just don't know. I think that's where we start. But the dialogue is critical.
I think one of the greatest dangers in our world is the rise in fundamentalism at every level and in every religious tradition, whether Islam or Judaism or Hinduism or Christianity, God knows. I think it's very frightening. I think it probably grows out of a desire for answers, for security. And the Grail has never been in that bag, and I'm convinced never will be, or we would cease to exist. It's very scary, and I think we have to be willing to live without some answers, but to continue to seek.
By not sharing, we are gaining so much hostility, anger, grief, need, that we can't continue to live with the oppression that other people are feeling because of what we have and don't share. And it's a very difficult cycle to break down.
And so we have to figure out a way to be joined in the project of social transformation. And that for the Grail to think about what is the role that it can play in the whole process. No one institution is going to be everything. But what is the special niche that the Grail might play? How does the Grail's vision about social transformation, community transformation, how does it contribute to even to social change in the United States?
I would say, what we have to offer is both some good, sharp analysis of what needs to be changed to bring us towards justice, and some positioning which we should improve on, certainly, of how to be parts of movements for change, as well as the spiritual core that might help us get there, and hope.
And our hope is that values in the Grail call out to women who have those values, who share them, who decide they want mutual support, they want community, and they want the energizing of themselves in this world for social transformation, so that joining with other women, even though we already share the values, will enhance them.
The Grail is an organization because we do things. We accomplish work together. It's a community because of our commitment and our life together that we share. But also it's a movement because we're building a vision, we're working towards a vision. We want other women to be a part of that. And it doesn't have to be large, it could be any size, but I think that the Grail is all those things. And when anyone tries to pigeonhole us one place or the other, it always comes up short.
The Grail is a complex space, but I find that in its turmoil, in its own heaves, I find a perfect balance for me in my life with the rest of my life. When I come here, I can understand what's going on and can participate, and it enriches me and fortifies me in ways that I cannot explain, and I can go on.
I don't think I'm special. I think a lot of women who met the Grail have an opportunity to meet other incredible, brave, and outrageous, countercultural, crazy oddballs, and this is the best way to be supported, is to see other women doing what you would like to do and living their life in the way you would like to live your life. And when you meet the Grail in that sense, you really, miracles happen in your life. Your life changes, and it's a big change.
I don't know any diverse spiritual group, faith-based group, that's like us. I mean, it might exist, but I don't know of it. Faith-based group usually means we share the same faith, tradition. And we don't, but we're a faith-based group. We all have faith. We have our, a song, and it comes from one of our international statements. It's been made into an antiphon or a song by one of our Grail composers. I'm not a singer, but it's God, the mystery of our
Growing in our deep